Jake Callahan lived alone, and that's just the way he preferred it. His ranch rested on the rim of a vast Arizona canyon, where the desert rolled endlessly and the wind spoke louder than men. Years back, a fire had taken everything, his wife, his son, and the last of his laughter. Since then, he'd built a quiet life out of habit and solitude. The land didn't pry, and neither did the cattle. Each day followed the same rhythm: rise with the sun, feed the horses, mend the fences, ride the range, fix what broke. At dusk, he'd sit on the porch with a mug of black coffee, watching the sunset bleed across the red sky. He rarely rode into town, and when he did, it was only for supplies. Hat low, voice lower, but one August evening, something broke that silence. While riding the South Ridge, Jake caught a faint sound, soft, like a whimper, nearly lost to the wind. At first, he thought it was an injured coyote, but as he drew closer, he heard it again, a voice, a woman's voice. Slowing his horse, he followed the sound through the brush until he found her beneath a mesquite tree. A young woman lay there, clutching her ankle. Her dress was torn, her face scratched and dusty, her dark hair tangled with twigs. Wide, frightened eyes met his, and for a heartbeat, neither moved. Jake dismounted slowly, hands raised to show peace. "You all right?" he asked, his voice rough from disuse. She didn't answer, too weak even to speak. Kneeling beside her, he offered his canteen. She hesitated, then took a sip, her lips trembling as the water touched them. "Can you walk?" he asked. She tried, but a sharp cry escaped. Her ankle was badly swollen. Without another word, Jake lifted her carefully into his arms, set her on his horse, and led them home through the fading light. At the cabin, he laid her on the worn couch and got to work. He wasn't a doctor, but he knew how to clean wounds and bind sprains. Wrapping her ankle in cloth, he dabbed on some of the herbal salve he kept for the horses. She flinched, silent. For hours she said nothing, and Jake didn't press. He set out beans and bread beside her, then stepped onto the porch to give her space. When she finally spoke that night, her voice was soft, accented, careful. "My name is Nia," she said. Jake turned from the doorway, surprised but steady. "Jake," he replied. She nodded, and the silence returned, but this time something lived inside it. A thin, fragile thread that connected them both. Over the next few days, Nia began to heal. She spoke little, but Jake could feel her presence, steady, observant, careful. She moved through his home with quiet respect, never touching more than she needed, always leaving things just as she found them. She gathered wild herbs from the canyon's edge and cooked meals that filled the cabin with a warmth Jake hadn't known in years. Bit by bit, he learned more about her. Nia was Apache, from a hidden village deep in the canyon. She never told the full story, but from her few words and the fear behind them, Jake understood. She had been taken by men who carried rifles and cruelty. Somehow she'd escaped, wandering for days through the desert before collapsing on his land. Jake didn't press her for more. He knew what silence meant, and he respected it. Still, something in him had changed. When he saw her grinding herbs in a clay bowl or sitting outside in the amber light of dusk, a stillness came over him, something close to peace. Then one morning, that peace cracked. Jake spotted boot prints near the north fence, fresh, deep, and wrong, not his. Not a ranch hand's. The tread was heavy, the kind worn by hunters or worse. He crouched, tracing the outline in the dust, and his instincts went sharp. Someone was out there. Someone looking. He said nothing to Nia, but that night he cleaned his rifle and set it by the door. The next day, while Nia worked inside with mesquite pods and sage, Jake saddled his horse and rode the perimeter. More tracks, this time leading toward the canyon. When he returned, she was waiting on the porch, her gaze distant. Her eyes flicked toward the rifle. "You saw them," she murmured. Jake nodded. "They close?" he asked. Nia's stare drifted over the desert, past the rocks painted gold by sunset. "They will come," she said softly. "They always do." A cold weight settled in Jake's chest. He'd faced loss before, but this was different. This time he wasn't guarding cattle or fences. He was guarding her, and she mattered more than he wanted to admit. That night, sleep wouldn't come. He sat on the porch, rifle across his lap, eyes on the horizon. Every whisper of wind made his hand twitch. Sometime past midnight, Nia stepped outside, a blanket in her hands. Without a word, she sat beside him, wrapping the blanket around them both, her shoulder brushing his. For a man who'd lived in silence for years, her quiet closeness thundered through him. In that moment, Jake Callahan knew the truth he'd been avoiding. He was falling for her. But love in the desert always came with a price. He feared the cost of saving Nia might be his heart. Dawn broke pale and heavy. The sun crawled over the canyon edge, hesitant. Jake stood on the porch, rifle loaded, horse ready, every muscle tight with knowing. Behind him, the cabin door creaked. Nia stepped out, wrapped in a worn blanket, her steps careful but steady. Their eyes met. She understood. "I can go," she whispered. "If I leave, they won't hurt you." Jake turned to her, jaw set, voice steady. "This is my land," he said. "They come here, they answer to me. But I brought danger to your home." Jake's eyes softened. "You brought life back to it." For a long moment they stood in silence, heavy with all the words they couldn't say. Then Jake reached out, his rough hand brushing hers. "I've already lost everything once," he said quietly. "I'm not losing you too." Just before noon they came. 4 riders, dusty coats, wide-brimmed hats low, pistols gleaming at their sides. They rode slow, confident, like men used to being feared. Jake waited in front of the house, feet planted, rifle in hand. The lead rider, tall and scarred across the cheek, reined in his horse. "You Callahan?" he asked. Jake gave a single nod. "We're looking for an Apache girl. Escaped from a government transport. Supposed to be sent to a relocation camp." He waved a folded paper, but Jake didn't look at it. "I haven't seen anyone." Jake lied evenly. The man narrowed his eyes. "You sure about that?" Jake's reply was flat. "You're trespassing." A crooked smile spread across the man's scar. "You really want to protect some runaway girl? She's government property. We're just doing our job." Jake didn't move. "This land's mine. You step off it, now." The air went still, tight as a drawn bowstring. The other riders shifted, hands sliding toward their guns. Then a voice cut through the tension. "She's not going anywhere," Nia said. She stood in the doorway, small but unflinching, her dark hair whipping in the wind. The scarred man's grin widened. "There she is." Jake moved before thought could form. His rifle cracked once, dust exploded near the man's boot. He hadn't missed. "Next one goes through your chest," Jake growled. The silence shattered. The riders dismounted, weapons half drawn. But Jake stood solid, unblinking. Then Nia stepped forward, limping but steady. "I'll go," she said, her voice clear. "No more blood." Jake turned sharply. "No, you don't have to do this. I won't let them hurt you." She shook her head. "I lived in fear too long. I won't let them destroy what I found here. Not you." She faced the scarred man. "If I come, you leave him be," he smirked. "Fine by me," Jake's pulse hammered. As the men reached for her, he lifted his rifle again. "She's not going," he said coldly. "She's under my protection." "You want her, you go through me," the scarred man sneered. "You ready to die for her?" Jake's voice was low and steady. "I'm ready to kill for her." Something in his tone froze the world. The wind stilled. Even the desert seemed to hold its breath. The mercenaries exchanged uneasy glances. They weren't soldiers, just hired guns, and no pay was worth dying for. Finally, the scarred man spat into the dust. "Not worth the trouble," he muttered. "Let's ride." The men turned and left, a cloud of dust trailing behind like a fading storm. Jake didn't lower his rifle until they vanished. Only then did his hands start to tremble. Nia stood beside him, tears tracing thin lines through the dust on her cheeks. She looked at him with something deeper than gratitude, with love. That evening, they sat together on the porch. "No danger now," Jake murmured. "No more running." "I was ready to give up," Nia whispered. "Didn't think I'd ever feel safe again." Jake took her hand gently. "You gave me something too." "What?" she asked softly. He looked out at the desert sky, painted in gold and rose. "A reason to feel alive again." She rested her head on his shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her. For the first time in years, the ranch didn't feel empty. The silence wasn't lonely. It was peaceful. Weeks passed. Nia's ankle healed and she stayed. She planted desert herbs behind the cabin, taught Jake to brew healing teas, to read the stars, to listen to the whispers of the land. He taught her to ride, to mend fences, to shoot straight. They never spoke the word love, but it lived in every glance, every quiet touch one night. As the moon rose over the canyon, Nia asked softly, "Do you ever wish things were different? That you hadn't lost what you had before?" Jake thought for a long moment, then shook his head. "No," he said, "because if I hadn't lost it, I wouldn't have found you." Tears glimmered in her eyes as she smiled. In time, the nearby town spoke of the Apache woman who lived with the silent cowboy. Some whispered, some frowned, but none dared cross Jake Callahan, not after what he'd done. And those who saw them together couldn't deny one thing. Jake smiled now. He laughed. And Nia, she looked like she belonged. They built a life, not perfect, but theirs. Years later, the legend still lingered. The story of the cowboy and the Apache woman. Some said she'd saved his soul, others that he'd saved her freedom. But Jake and Nia never cared for what was said. They just lived, loved, and watched the desert bloom around them.